your daily classroom for CSEC and CAVE subjects. I am Alethea Brown, your CSEC and English literature teacher for this session. Today, we are going to be going through dramatic techniques in the play, The Tempest. Are you ready? Come with me. You would recall from our last session that we looked at the plot development of The Tempest. You would recall that we also looked at what type of play The Tempest is, and we realized that there are elements of The Tempest that can either fall under romantic, comedy, or, do you remember what the other one was? Okay, so you need to go back to your notes. But whichever of the components you're looking at, we saw where they can fit into the play itself. We looked at the fact that in looking at the plot structure, you can use the 5-point plot system. So Act 1 would act as the, very good, exposition. In Act 2, Shakespeare takes us to the rising action. Act 3 functions as the climax. By the time you get to Act 4, you see what's going to unravel in terms of how the play is going to end. So that is the falling action. And then Act 5 now acts as the resolution. Excellent. Today we want to take the discussion a little further, and we're going to be looking at some dramatic devices that Shakespeare uses in The Tempest. So in terms of our objectives, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain what dramatic devices are. You also should be able to identify 3 dramatic devices that Shakespeare employs in The Tempest, and also assess the effectiveness of the devices in the development of the play. All right, bear those in mind as we continue. Before we delve into our discussion, it is important for us to come up with a working definition of dramatic devices. When we talk about dramatic devices, what are we talking about? We can look at dramatic devices as techniques that a writer employs in order to make the work a little clearer, in order for us to be more interested in the work. Think about baking a cake. If you only include a little flour and a little sugar, how is that cake going to come out? It's not going to be very tasty at all. But if you include some raisins, some vanilla, cinnamon powder, etc. and so on, then your cake should have a better flavor. So consider techniques as those strategies that add flavor to the work. And we are going to be looking at some of the techniques that Shakespeare uses. Some examples of dramatic techniques are the soliloquy. Does anybody remember what a soliloquy is? Very good. It is a situation where one character is on the stage and the character speaks so that the audience can hear. And the soliloquy has a particular function because what it does is to give certain ideas that are going through the character's headspace. It kind of allows the audience to know what the character's motives are. All right, so that's a soliloquy. So one character on the stage, but is addressing the audience or speaking out loudly the thoughts so that the audience can hear. Another dramatic technique is asides. Now, you might be asking, how do asides differ from soliloquies? Well, remember, the soliloquy is one speaker on stage addressing the audience or speaking out his or her thoughts aloud. When it comes on to the asides, you may have other characters on the stage, but one speaker is also speaking his or her thoughts out loud. And again, the asides function in a similar manner to the soliloquy. So we get an idea of the thoughts of the character, what the character's motives are, possibly what the next step for the character is going to be. Another technique we can look at is the whole idea of irony. And later on, we're going to delve a little bit more into what irony entails. Imagery. And this is a technique that you might also find in poetry. And it's the use of different devices that allow you to see, smell, taste, feel what exactly it is that the writer is trying to communicate through the work. Another technique is the use of song and music. And if you remember aspects of this particular play, The Tempest, you would have seen Shakespeare infusing song and music. Think about the time when the fairies were having that, presentation for the betrothal of Miranda to Ferdinand. There was I think it was a little concert thing that they put on, and there was much fanfare with music and song and so on. We even saw Caliban singing. I can just imagine what Caliban's voice sounds like singing. All right, so he integrates song and music into the piece. Another technique is the use of figurative language. And whereas this is not specific to drama, it is also used sometimes, again, to add clarity, flavor to the work so that the audience or the reader can better understand what is happening. When we talk about figurative language, we're talking about elevated language. It's not language that we necessarily use on an everyday basis, but when we do use it, it's to add clarity to whatever we are speaking or to add color. So instead of saying, the sun came out brightly. Yes, the sun came out brightly. You can add a little flavor to that. The sun shone in all her beauty and her smile radiated on the entire earth. Something like that. So the sun there being personified, giving it human qualities. Very good. So these are some of the devices, but today we're going to be discussing 3 of the techniques that Shakespeare infuses into The Tempest to add color to the work. Do you remember this scene? Right, so this is one of the scenes with Prospero and Caliban. And I'm just going to try to, enact or reenact what was transpiring here. So here comes Prospero and he says, "Come forth, I say, there's much business for thee. Come forth, Tortoise, when? I must eat my dinner. This island's mine by Sycorax, my mother, which thou takest from me. Abhorred slave, which of any print of goodness wilt not take. Being capable of all ill, I pitied thee, took pains to make thee speak, taught thee each hour one thing or other. You taught me language, and my profit on it is, I know how to curse." Do you recall that scene with Caliban and Prospero? Yes, that was the very first time that we saw Caliban being introduced into the play. And Prospero was calling him, because remember, Caliban is Prospero's slave. So Prospero was calling him to come and perform one of his duties, probably to go get firewood or to go get something from the sea for them to make food. And then, Caliban is very feisty, so he tells Prospero that he has to eat his food. Prospero calls him a tortoise because I guess Caliban was moving too slowly. And the conversation continued. We see where Caliban accuses Prospero of having stolen his island that his mother Sycorax left for him. And he also went on to say that Prospero taught him language. And the way that Caliban benefited from that was that he uses the same language to curse Prospero. All right, so I'm going to use that scene as a point of reference for the first device that we're going to look at. And that is irony. Now, do you know what irony is? Well, as you think about it, because I'm sure you would have heard about irony at some point, we use irony every day. But a point to note is that irony is one of the techniques that can be used to add color or flavor to the literary work. So what is irony? Irony can be seen as a storytelling tool to create a contrast between how things seem and how they really are beneath the surface. What does that mean? It means that appearance might be different from reality. So what you see is not necessarily what you get. Another way to look at irony is a case where expectation is different from outcome. So I'm going to use a little mathematical expression here. Yes, I'm infusing mathematics into my literature class to show you how irony works. So here we have irony. So irony is a case where expectation all right, how do you read that in your maths class? Expectation is not equal to outcome. Am I brilliant or what? I just infused maths into the literature class. Oh, wow. All right, so expectation is different from outcome. And this is what we call situational irony. So you expect that something will go one way, but in the end, it turns out the opposite way. Think of this, for example. A doctor dies of the common flu. I'm sure your reaction is going to be like, really? Exactly, because the situation is that this is a doctor. You would expect that the doctor can safeguard him or herself from the common flu. But what happens? The doctor dies of the common flu. That's ironic. Think about this kind of situation again. A fireplace, a firehouse burns down, or the fire station burns down. Ironic, isn't it? So if the fire station is going to burn down, what does that tell us about the fire chief and his personnel? All right? That's ironic. And that's situational irony, where the expectation is different from the outcome. Very good. There's another type of irony, and this one is called verbal irony. Now, in verbal irony, sometimes this is communicated through speech. So what is said is not necessarily what is meant. Similar to the situational irony. Let's go back to situational. What was expected is not what really happens. In verbal irony, what is said is not necessarily what is meant. Very good. So, an example of verbal irony, your friend comes out and she's dressed like a giraffe, and you know from her to heaven that she doesn't look good. But you say to your friend, oh my, you look fabulous, just fabulous. That is verbal irony. And verbal irony manifests itself in the form of sarcasm sometimes. So you know when people say, oh, you're being sarcastic, probably you are, because what you're saying is not necessarily what you mean. Husbands normally do that, you know, especially those wives who are conscious about their figure. So the wife might come to the husband and say, honey, how do I look? But in order to have a peaceful life, the husband says to the wife, honey, you look fabulous, slim and trim. When, to be honest, the wife is not really slim and trim. That's sarcasm. And I guess in some cases, sarcasm can prevent a lot of feuds from happening. All right? So sarcasm is a good example of verbal irony. And then there's one more type of irony, and this one is called dramatic irony. And since we're focusing on drama, then this one becomes more than applicable. So dramatic irony now is where the audience knows something that evidently the characters on the stage do not. So the audience is aware of what is happening, but the characters on the stage do not necessarily know. Look at the picture that we have there, for example. There's a shark beneath the water. So if you were watching a movie like this, I'm thinking that this came from Jaws, we know what's going to happen next. This man who is lying nicely on the surface of the water doesn't know what impending danger there is for him. Dramatic irony. Audience knows what the characters do not necessarily know. All right, so the outcome for the characters might be unexpected, but the audience knew all along what was going to happen. So at this point you say, no, me didn't know. I knew what was going to happen. That's dramatic irony. So we have looked at three types of irony: situational, verbal, and dramatic. Let's see now how we can apply these to the drama, The Tempest. The scene with Prospero and Caliban that I just mimed for you. There were two situational ironies coming out in that scene. Can you pinpoint them? Two examples of situational irony. The first one is Prospero stealing Caliban's island. Now, how does this become ironic? Think about it. Prospero steals Caliban's island and he imprisons Caliban. He makes Caliban his slave. All right, so we have that situation. Can you recall anybody in the drama stealing anything from Prospero? Yes, his brother Antonio stole his dukedom. We are not at the ironic part yet, you know, we're getting there. So Prospero steals Caliban's island. Antonio stole Prospero's dukedom. What is Prospero doing to Antonio? He is punishing Antonio. Through the storm, he has brought them to the island because he's going to take revenge on them. Now, shouldn't it follow that if Prospero stole Caliban's island, Caliban should be allowed to take vengeance on him? Okay, but here is Prospero now treating Caliban as a slave, treating Caliban as if he's not the rightful owner of the island, when at the same time he's punishing his brother for having stolen his dukedom. Do you see how this is situational irony? Right, the logic should be Prospero steals Caliban's island, Caliban takes revenge, and Prospero should be fine with that. because Antonio stole his island and he's taking revenge on Antonio. But here is Caliban, here is Prospero behaving all self-conscious, all self-worthy, chastising Antonio for the very thing that he is doing to Caliban. All right, so that's situational irony. So we have identified the irony there. Now, what is the function of the irony here? Remember that when we look at the dramatic techniques in terms of their effectiveness, we are looking at what aspect of the drama the technique is helping to highlight. What aspect of the drama is it adding flavor to? So just to recap, we're going to put on the board here some of the areas of the drama that the devices can help to enhance. All right, so let's do that. So remember, the devices help to enhance an aspect or an element of the drama. And what are those elements again? We have the setting. So it could be a case where it is highlighting something about the setting. It could be a case where it is highlighting something about character. Maybe it is adding to the overall plot development. Or is it that the device or the technique is helping us to be able to detect the themes more? Whenever you're looking at the effectiveness of a technique, it will speak to one of these elements: setting, character, plot, or theme. So in the case now, going back over here, in the case where Prospero steals Caliban's island, enslaves him, but is chastising his brother Antonio for doing the very same thing, we said that this is situational irony. Which of the elements of the drama do you think this particular situation is shedding light on? Which of the elements is it making clearer for the audience? Well, if you said character traits, it means you're thinking. But which character and what traits are being brought out? Think about it. It has to be the character of Prospero, and we also see something about the character of Caliban. So it sheds light on the issue of colonialism also, and it gives us a little sneak peek as to who Prospero is. Let us look at that a little bit more. Highlighting character traits. Prospero stole Caliban's island. Antonio stole Prospero's dukedom. Prospero is meting out revenge against Antonio for something that he is doing to Caliban also. We see that the character of Prospero is brought under the spotlight. Is Prospero fair? Is he just? Is he doing what is right? If it is that he's doing the same thing to Caliban, does he have the right to be meting out revenge against his brother? So it brings character traits into scrutiny. It sheds light on the issue of colonialism. And if we're looking at colonialism here, what aspect of the drama would that be? Which element? The themes, very good. So it sheds light on the theme of colonialism. This man, or usurpation, I heard that, very good. So it shows us that Prospero colonized the island, made Caliban a slave, pretty much the same way that his brother took away his authority, all right? So we can move on from here now. Another example is the case of the shipwreck. Tell me what kind of irony is here. Alonso thinks that Ferdinand is dead, but the audience knows that Ferdinand is not dead. What kind of irony is this? Yes, you go, Chanel. It is situational or dramatic irony. All right, so the audience knows something that the characters do not know. So, dramatic irony. Again, we also have to look at how this irony is functioning in the play. So, what this does is to heighten the tension in the play and adds to the development of the plot. So, now that we know that Ferdinand is alive, where do we go from here? Where does the play go from here? Dramatic irony. So, remember, in identifying the device, it's not just enough to say it's irony. You're also looking at how it adds to the overall development of the work. So in terms of the functions of irony, we see where irony builds the plot by intensifying the tension. Irony also highlights character traits, and irony can be used to emphasize thematic concerns. Are you following? Are there any questions so far? Okay, good. I'm happy you're with me. We're going to move on to look at another device that is used in the play, and that is the whole aspect of asides. What did we say asides are? Asides are, they are points in the story where a character is communicating something to the audience. Even though there are other characters on stage, the audience is of the impression that the other characters are not hearing what this particular character is saying. So it's to give the audience some information that's about something that is going to happen, about character traits, etc., and so on. So asides. A character is speaking, although other characters are on stage, they do not necessarily know what the character or hear what the character is saying. All right, so moving on. So we just established what are asides, and it says here, an aside is a dramatic device in which a character speaks to the audience. By convention, the audience is to realize that the character's speech is unheard by the other characters on the stage. That's what I was just explaining. But what's the function of the asides? First of all, let's pinpoint an example of an aside being used in the drama. Act 3, Scene 1. You can turn your books to Act 3, Scene 1, where Prospero is speaking about Miranda. Miranda is on the stage, but Prospero is speaking to the audience, and he says, "Poor worm, thou art infected. This visitation shows it." Do you remember that? That's where Ferdinand was introduced into the play, right? And Miranda falls head over heels in love with him. Prospero realizes that Miranda has fallen in love with Prospero, and he communicates that to the audience. But why? What is the effectiveness of this aside? Why tell the audience that Miranda has fallen in love with Ferdinand? Well, this aside could show the underlying theme of deceit throughout the play. So the audience knows that Miranda and Ferdinand's relationship is being directed and controlled by Prospero. Remember, it is through magic that Prospero is actually manipulating these two people to fall in love, and we know what his grand plan is to get back his dukedom. So if he unites Ferdinand and Miranda, then that's one way of getting back his dukedom. So this is an example of an aside, and what it does is to give us an idea of an underlying theme, the theme of deception, as is used by Prospero through his magical pursuits. Can you identify any other asides being used in the play? I can give you another example. Prospero again. "I had forgot this foul conspiracy, the beast Caliban and his confederates against my life. The minute of their plot is almost come." Act 4, Scene 1. Do you recall when this transpired? Yes, it is a time when Prospero was at the banquet that he had prepared for Miranda and Ferdinand, and the fairies were there dancing and singing and so on, and suddenly Prospero remembered that Caliban was plotting to kill him. So he speaks to the audience. Remember, the other characters are on the stage, but this is Prospero speaking directly to the audience, and he's saying that he remembers that the beast Caliban was planning to kill him. In the midst of the celebration, the thought just came back to Prospero that Caliban was planning to kill him. So what is the function? Because remember, this is the whole point of looking at the function, the effectiveness of this aside in the drama. It makes the audience know that Prospero is aware of Caliban's plan. And if Prospero is aware of Caliban's plan, it means that this aside is also contributing to the plot. Because what is Prospero going to do now? What is his next step going to be? All right, it adds to the falling action. And remember, the falling action is where we begin to see how the major conflicts are unraveling. We kind of get an idea of how they are going to be resolved. And it further points to the theme of conspiracy and deception. So just like Prospero is conspiring to take back his dukedom, that is how Prospero is also conspiring to take Prospero's life. All right, so we have looked at the effectiveness of the aside right there. So generally speaking now, when asides are used in the drama piece, they can aid in the plot development. How? By building tension or by contributing to some aspect of the conflict. They reveal character traits. So you could look at how the aside helps us to see what do we see about Caliban coming from the aside, what aspect of Prospero do we see. And we realize that Prospero is a very vindictive person. Because he could have just forgotten about Caliban, but no, in the midst of the celebration, he suddenly remembers that Caliban was plotting to kill him, and so he has to do something about it. It also reveals characters' motives and their intentions. So we saw 2 motives and 2 intentions coming out here. Caliban plotting to kill Prospero, and Prospero deciding to do something about it. Are there any questions so far? So we have looked at irony, and we have looked at the matter of the use of asides. Let's continue. We now point our attention to imagery. And this is something you would have heard maybe from your poetry class, imagery. Now, when we talk about imagery, not because the word has image in it means that it's only pertaining to the sense of sight. No. When we talk about imagery, we are talking about all the details that take into consideration all of our senses. So a writer will create a particular piece so that it appeals to our sense of sight, our sense of hearing. We can taste, we can smell what is actually happening. And when that happens, what it does is to pull us into the drama piece so that we can relate to it. We can, even if we are watching it on stage or if you're reading it, you kind of can create a mental image of what is unfolding in the piece. All right, so although imagery contains the word image, it does not only refer to descriptive language that appeals to the sense of sight. Imagery includes language that appeals to all of the human senses, including sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. And how are we able to identify the types of images that a writer uses? We have to look at the descriptive words. So, like any other work, Shakespeare also incorporates imagery into The Tempest. Let's see how. We see Shakespeare using a lot of nature images. And what are nature images? Very good. So we see nature images as those elements of the natural realm, the natural atmosphere that he incorporates into the play. And that is to heighten our senses and to get us to see, feel, hear what is happening, become a part of the experience. Because unless you're able to relate to the drama piece, you're not going to enjoy it. I know that some of you, by the time you hear Shakespeare, you get nervous all over. But if you can enjoy the drama piece, follow the characters, look at the descriptions, become a part of it, then you'll be able to enjoy the piece some more. All right, so we look at nature images here. And of course, I'm going to be focusing on the scene with Miranda when she saw what was happening in that terrible storm. So here is what Miranda says. At the beginning of the play, Miranda describes a storm that she has seen with its wild waters and how the sky, it seems, would pour down stinking pitch. By that, the sky mounting to the welkin's cheek dashes the fire out. Are you seeing the different images coming out here? Mostly visual here, but even if you have not seen the play, being acted out on a stage, you can almost visualize what is happening here. So this is the opening scene, and it's where Prospero created that horrible storm. So Miranda is there, and she's looking out, and she's like, oh, my father, if you are the one doing this, please let it stop because I'm suffering based on what I saw. She's seeing wild waters. The sky is looking like pitch. It means that the atmosphere has become dark, and she's seeing dashes of fire. This is horrible. This is a horrifying experience. And Shakespeare creates that through the use of imagery. Where do we go from here? So we have identified the device. Where do we go from here? To look at its function, the effectiveness. Very good. So in this case now, what the imagery does is to highlight the horrific nature of the storm. If it is highlighting the nature of the storm, which aspect of the drama is it pointing to? Is it the setting? Is it character, plot, or themes? Which of these aspects do you think it's pertaining to? The setting. Very good. So at the get-go, Shakespeare creates a setting that is horrifying. It is a tumultuous storm. And remember, that's where we get the whole idea of the tempest from. This storm that was created so that Prospero can use it to exact his revenge and hopefully get his dukedom back. So it highlights the horrific nature of the storm, hence points to the setting. We can look at another image from Act 2, Scene 1, where Gonzalo is in awe of the island as they have landed on it and tries to encourage the others. Do you remember that scene? He sees everything as beautiful and green, and he says that the clothes that they're wearing look like clothes that were just washed and laundered Of course, the others could not see it. But Gonzalo, being the typical, person who sees the good in everything, that's what he saw. So, for example, he says how lush and lusty the green grass looks. Which of your senses would that description appeal to? The sense of sight. Excellent. Our garments being as they were drenched in the sea, being rather new dyed. That's how we're seeing the clothes, as if they are brand new. Again, another image appealing to the sense of sight. Excellent. The air breathes upon us. Here most sweetly. Which of the senses this time? The sense of feeling. Very good. So the atmosphere here is created as something mystifying. So what we see here is that something is amiss, because a terrible storm just occurred. Now they're on the island shipwrecked. And here it is that the place looks lush. Their garments look clean and pretty. And the air to this character feels, smooth and crisp. Something is off here. So this again probably points to the setting of the play. And we realize now that another element is brought in, and that is the whole idea of the element of magic. So the island is not necessarily what it seems to be. All right, so this is how imagery is used. So in terms of the general functions of imagery, it can highlight features of the setting. Remember when we saw the fire and the waters piling up and the sky being pitch black and so on, we realized that this kind of setting was, kind of horrifying, especially for Miranda, who is so innocent and has never seen anything like this in her whole life before. The imagery can also reveal character traits. For example, in the case of Gonzalo, we realize that he's an optimist. So he sees the good in everything. Remember, even when they were on the ship, and he was the one who said that the boatswain didn't look like somebody who was going to drown. Hence, they were fine. He looked like somebody who would die by what? Hanging. So he saw the good in everything. Here it is that he's also seeing the good in the fact that, they're on the island. In fact, he started off by saying we are safe. And look at the good. Our clothes look brand new. The air is crisp and we are alive and well. So it highlights character traits. And it places emphasis in this particular case on the use of magic. All right, so we see that, remember that magic is one of the elements that Shakespeare uses in the play as well. In another class, we can look at how he uses magic to add tension, how he uses magic to propel the plot of the story along. Okay. So what we covered today was an explanation of what dramatic devices are. Do you remember what those are? Dramatic devices are the tools, the strategies, the techniques that the writer incorporates into the piece to make it a little bit more interesting. So a writer can use different devices, and we looked at some of those devices. Do you remember what they are, especially as it pertains to drama? There can be the use of soliloquies, very good. The use of asides, excellent. We also looked at imagery, figurative language. Those are some of the devices. We identified 3 dramatic devices that Shakespeare uses in this particular play. Do you remember what they are? Among other devices, he uses irony, and we looked at 3 types of irony. What were they? Verbal, situational, and dramatic. Excellent. We said the verbal irony, what is spoken is not necessarily what is meant. Situational irony, when we use the mathematical concept there, expectation is not equal to outcome. So whatever you expected to happen, it took a turn, like a boy hiding from his principal because he's doing something wrong, only to realize that the principal is standing above him and looking down at him. Ironic, isn't it? And we also looked at dramatic irony, which is a case where the audience knows something that the characters don't necessarily know. And we assessed the effectiveness of the devices in the development of the play. We said in assessing the effectiveness of the devices, you have to look at what aspect of the drama the devices are pertaining to. Is it developing setting? Are they being used to develop character traits? Do they help to identify themes? Do they help to move the plot along in terms of building conflict and tension and so on? So those are some of the aspects that the devices or the techniques can help to enhance in the play. Are there any questions? Okay. You know this is my favorite part now. So I'm leaving you with a practice question, and it says here, discuss one dramatic device or technique that Shakespeare employs to develop the plot of the play, The Tempest. Again, discuss one dramatic device or technique that Shakespeare employs to develop the plot of The Tempest. Yes, and I can hear all the complaints coming already. Yes, you're going to write it. Yeah, enjoy writing it as well. But just to put your doubts aside and to kind of appease your hearts, I'm going to show you how you can go about answering the question. I tell you, students are something else. All right, so the first thing is to discuss the plot of the play. Discuss the plot. That is step one. What does the plot entail? After you have done that now, then you're going to select how many devices or techniques? 1. So don't bother to show off your knowledge on the 10 devices that you know. The question asks you for 1 device or technique. So you select that device. Name the device, and you can also give a brief explanation as to what the device is all about. So select the device and briefly explain it. All right, select the device and briefly explain it. And then the third step now is to show the relationship between the device and the plot. What area of the plot is the device helping to enhance? And that should give you a nice little package to write a beautiful essay. And remember always to use your evidence. As I always say, literature is like a courthouse. You cannot go to court without your evidence. So this is where we're going to stop for today. That's all the time we have for CSEC literature. Up next is Cape Sociology. Have a good day, everybody.
Here, interactive classes for all ages on the School Time channel on onespotmedia.com. With a combination of live Zoom classes and recorded class time, Schools Not Out lessons, and numerous educational content, we've created a comprehensive 24-hour channel dedicated exclusively to educating our nation's youth. Early childhood through to primary, secondary and tertiary, it's one stop on one spot for education 24 hours. Brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in association with Television Jamaica Limited.